Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that every chain around your wrists has vanished. No obligations binding you. No rules dictating your next move. No voice telling you what you must do. The calendar is blank, the expectations erased, the pathways wide open in every direction. Freedom absolute and unchallenged. At first, the air feels intoxicating. A boundless horizon stretches before you, shimmering with endless choices. But as you step forward, something strange happens. The weight of that horizon presses down on your chest. The very openness that once felt liberating begins to suffocate. The silence of infinite possibility grows louder than any cage. You thought freedom would feel like lightness. Instead, it feels like gravity. How could this be? How could the absence of chains feel heavier than the chains themselves? Why do so many who claim to crave freedom recoil when it is finally placed in their hands? Here lies the paradox that philosophers, poets, and prophets have wrestled with for centuries. Freedom is not a simple gift. It is not always joyous. Sometimes it is unbearable. To be free means not only to choose, but to bear the consequences of choice. To live without the comforting illusion that someone else is responsible for the outcome of your life. Freedom does not just release you, it condemns you to yourself. Think of it. Every excuse you once leaned on dissolves. You cannot blame the boss, the system, the tradition, the rule book, or the tyrant. When nothing holds you back, the only explanation left for your stagnation, your despair, or your mediocrity is you. And so the question emerges with frightening clarity. Do you really want to be free? Or do you secretly prefer the cage, the rules, the authority, the external hand that spares you the agony of deciding who you are? Jean-Paul Sartre called this the condemnation of freedom. Condemned because you cannot escape it. Even when you hide behind excuses, you are still choosing to surrender, choosing not to act, choosing to let others dictate the shape of your existence. Whether you acknowledge it or not, you are free and therefore responsible. And that responsibility is a weight few can carry without trembling. Consider this: prisons, both literal and psychological, often bring a twisted comfort. They shrink the infinite horizon into 4 walls. They reduce the unbearable chaos of possibility into predictable monotony. It is why so many who escape cages return to them. Why soldiers returning from war sometimes feel more lost in peace than they ever did in conflict. Why individuals who break free from oppressive systems often recreate them in new forms. Freedom terrifies more than it comforts. So here you stand at the edge of this realization. Freedom is both gift and burden. It offers infinite possibility, yet demands infinite responsibility. It is what we claim to desire most, yet what we often sabotage most ferociously. The haunting question remains: if freedom is so heavy, why do we chase it? And if so few can carry it, what happens to those who collapse under its weight? This is where our journey begins, not with the joy of liberation, but with the unsettling truth that the chains you once cursed may have been easier to bear than the vast, uncharted expanse of your own autonomy. If freedom is the most natural state of existence, why does it so often feel unnatural, even unbearable? Why does liberation, something humanity has fought, bled, and died for, so frequently lead to paralysis, despair, or even self-destruction? To answer this, we must wander into the deeper corridors of psychology and philosophy, where the roots of this hidden problem entangle. Carl Jung once warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Freedom forces this terror upon you. When external structures dissolve, you can no longer project your identity onto roles, systems, or authorities. You must look in the mirror and confront not just who you are, but who you could have been had you chosen differently. Every abandoned path echoes back at you like a ghost. This is why many seek comfort in conformity. Social roles, traditions, and systems act like scaffolding for fragile identities. They tell you where to stand, what to value, how to measure success. In exchange for obedience, they relieve you of the unbearable pressure of inventing yourself from scratch. But when those structures collapse or when you tear them down, you are left with the dizzying abyss of possibility. Freedom demands invention, and invention requires courage. Nietzsche, ever the provocateur, declared that most people cannot bear this abyss. He described humanity as preferring the comfort of herd morality, obedience, consensus, repetition, because the alternative is too shattering. To truly embrace freedom is to stand outside the herd, exposed and trembling, to accept that you alone must shape your values in a cosmos indifferent to your existence. For Nietzsche, this was the price of becoming what he called the Bermenschnot, a tyrant, but a creator of meaning in a meaningless world. But how many dare to bear that responsibility? And how many instead retreat into smaller cages, disguising them as safety? This retreat into safety has its psychological explanation too. Cognitive science suggests the brain is wired to conserve energy by seeking predictability. Choices, especially endless ones, are metabolically expensive. Psychologists speak of decision fatigue, the exhaustion that comes not from work itself, but from the burden of deciding what kind of work, what kind of life to pursue. Too much freedom overwhelms the nervous system. The brain longs for boundaries, the way the body longs for shelter. This is why many self-sabotage their own liberation. Consider the person who leaves a soul-crushing job only to recreate the same dynamics in a new workplace, or the individual who breaks free from a toxic relationship yet falls into the same patterns with another partner. The cage is familiar, and familiarity feels safer than freedom's uncharted wilderness. Philosophers like Schopenhauer went even further, arguing that freedom itself is an illusion. For him, human beings are driven not by conscious choice, but by a blind, irrational will to live that enslaves us to endless striving. What we call freedom may simply be the space between compulsion's a mirage, not a reality. If that is true, then perhaps the heaviness of freedom comes from the suspicion that it was never entirely ours to begin with. And yet, Viktor Frankl offered a counterpoint, forged in the crucible of the concentration camps. He wrote that even when every external freedom is stripped away, there remains one final freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude. This, he argued, is the essence of human dignity. Freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the presence of meaning. Without meaning, freedom collapses into despair. With meaning, even captivity can hold a strange kind of liberation. Here lies the hidden problem at the heart of freedom. It is never merely about external choices. It is about internal orientation. Without an anchor of meaning, freedom unmoors the soul. Without courage, freedom collapses into chaos. Without responsibility, freedom curdles into self-sabotage. This is why Sartre called freedom a condemnation. It is both unavoidable and unbearable. You cannot escape if free refusal to choose is itself a choice. And yet to fully embrace it is to carry a weight so immense that only those willing to forge meaning from suffering can withstand it. We crave freedom, yet flee from it. We demand it, yet sabotage it. We glorify it in speech, yet betray it in practice. The hidden problem is not freedom itself, it is our unpreparedness to hold it. Our terror of the mirror it places before us. And so the question deepens. If freedom without meaning destroys us, then how exactly does this destruction manifest in the hidden corners of our lives? The terror of freedom does not always announce itself dramatically. More often, it seeps quietly into the fabric of ordinary life, disguising itself as procrastination, indecision, or endless distraction. What appears trivial on the surface is often the symptom of something much heavier: silent rebellion against the burden of being free. Think of the countless hours lost to scrolling, to numbing routines, to activities that neither enrich nor destroy but simply stall. On the surface, they appear harmless, a little entertainment, a bit of rest. But beneath them lies an evasion of freedom's demand to choose deliberately, to live consciously. When you delay decisions or bury yourself in trivialities, you are not resting, you are hiding from the weight of possibility. Psychologists have long studied this avoidance under the lens of cognitive biases. Take status quo bias, the tendency to prefer things as they are, even when change would clearly improve life. The unspoken reason: change requires choice, and choice requires bearing the responsibility of being wrong. To stay the same feels safer, even if it is suffocating. Or consider analysis paralysis. When presented with too many options, people often freeze entirely. Studies show that shoppers are more likely to buy when given fewer choices of jam than when presented with dozens. If the small decision of picking jam can overwhelm, how much more paralyzing is the vast decision of crafting a meaningful life? This paralysis does not remain confined to individual psychology. It bleeds into culture, shaping entire societies. Consumerism thrives on it, flooding people with endless products, lifestyles, and identities, to try on knowing that most will cycle endlessly through them without ever arriving at fulfillment. Technology accelerates it, presenting an infinite scroll of possibilities, while ensuring that none demand real commitment. The illusion of choice replaces the substance of freedom, and so freedom begins to erode, not through tyranny, but through abundance. Too much possibility becomes indistinguishable from no possibility at all. The weight of choice collapses into numbness, and numbness gives rise to apathy, but the consequences reach even deeper. Freedom without meaning breeds anxiety. When nothing outside you dictates your values, you are left staring into the void, grasping for anchors. Sartre described this as nausea, the raw confrontation with existence's absurdity. For some, this confrontation sparks creativity, the chance to write their own script. For many, it provokes despair. This despair often disguises itself. It wears the mask of ambition, as people chase external markers of success to shield themselves from the emptiness within. It wears the mask of rebellion as individuals reject systems without ever building new ones. It even wears the mask of freedom itself, where I can do whatever I want becomes a justification for drifting aimlessly, never daring to confront what one truly wants. The most haunting consequence of all is self-betrayal. You sabotage yourself not because you are weak, but because success would expose you to the terrifying vastness of possibility. If you succeed, then what? The question looms larger than failure ever could. Failure provides boundaries. Success obliterates them. So people retreat into patterns of self-sabotage, secretly relieved when things collapse, because collapse feels solid, manageable, safe. On the societal scale, this dynamic explains why revolutions so often devour themselves. A nation breaks its chains, only to replace them with new ones. The freedom won on the battlefield is squandered in politics, bureaucracy, or authoritarianism, because the collective psyche mirrors the individual one, unprepared for the responsibility of freedom. It unconsciously recreates the cage. Freedom is heavy, too heavy for many to carry alone. And when the weight becomes unbearable, people collapse into distractions, addictions, conformity, or authoritarianism. They trade freedom for comfort, responsibility for certainty, meaning for numbness. But the question remains, must it always be this way? Are we doomed to oscillate between cages and chaos, never learning to hold the delicate balance of true freedom? Or is there another path of rebellion, not against freedom itself, but against our own fear of it? If the weight of freedom crushes so many, what would it mean to rise beneath it, to not only carry it, but to wield it as strength? The answer is not to flee back into the cage, nor to surrender to paralysis, but to begin a rebellion, not against society, not against authority, but against the fear within yourself. The first act of rebellion is radical acceptance, admitting that freedom will never feel light. The heaviness is not a flaw, but the essence of what makes you human. To live freely is to carry the burden of consequence, of responsibility, of self-definition. The rebellion begins when you stop expecting freedom to feel effortless and instead learn to embrace its gravity as the very ground beneath your existence. Nietzsche's challenge was not for the timid. He insisted that true freedom requires becoming who you are, not who society tells you, not who convenience allows, but who emerges when you strip away borrowed values and confront the abyss. This is no small task. It requires courage to burn down false scaffolding and the patience to construct meaning brick by brick. But the alternative, drifting as a hollow echo of someone else's expectations, so more dangerous. So, how do you rebel against the tendency to collapse under freedom's weight? One way is to narrow the horizon. Infinite choices are paralyzing, but deliberate self-limitation can be liberating. Kierkegaard called this the knight of faith, the one who, in the face of infinite possibility, makes a single, wholehearted choice and commits to it. Freedom is not the endless postponement of decision, but the willingness to stake your life on something, even if it means rejecting countless other paths. This act of choosing does not eliminate freedom. It activates it. By committing, you transform abstract possibility into living reality. You rebel against the temptation to remain forever at the crossroads, and in doing so, you discover the paradox. Boundaries, when chosen, deepen freedom rather than diminish it. Another rebellion lies in responsibility. Viktor Frankl's insight that freedom without responsibility collapses into chaos offers a key. Responsibility is not a chain, it is an anchor. By orienting your choices toward meaning beyond yourself, you give your freedom weight that strengthens rather than crushes. This is why parents will endure unimaginable sacrifices for their children, why creators will persist in their art despite rejection, why revolutionaries will risk everything for justice. Responsibility transforms freedom from burden into purpose. Then there is the rebellion of presence. In a world engineered for distraction, to be truly present is an act of defiance. Freedom collapses when you scatter yourself across infinite trivialities. But when you reclaim your attention, when you meet life moment by moment with awareness, you rebel against the numbing forces that dilute your existence. Presence reclaims your life from the machinery of distraction and restores the raw immediacy of choice. Perhaps the boldest rebellion is to embrace failure. Most people fear freedom because they fear the consequences of wrong choices. But what if wrong choices are not enemies, but teachers? To fail and still choose again is to prove that freedom cannot be destroyed by missteps. Every failure becomes a rehearsal for resilience, a sharpening of clarity. The rebellion here is against perfectionism, the illusion that one must always choose correctly. Freedom is not about being right. It is about daring to decide. And finally, the rebellion requires community. Freedom is unbearable in isolation, but when carried with others, it transforms. Existentialists remind us that no one can bear our freedom for us, but others can remind us that we are not alone in carrying it. Shared meaning, shared struggle, shared responsibility. These are not cages, but scaffolds that allow individuals to hold freedom without collapsing under its weight. The rebellion against fear, conformity, and self-sabotage does not promise lightness. It promises depth. It asks you to stop fleeing the heaviness of freedom and instead forge yourself within it. To step forward knowing the horizon is infinite and to choose anyway. For in that act of choosing, boldly, imperfectly, courageously, you begin to discover that the weight of freedom, though immense, is also the weight of your own becoming. But even as we learn to rebel, a final question remains. What lies at the heart of this burden? What is the ultimate truth about freedom that, if seen clearly, could dissolve the paradox entirely? There comes a moment, after wrestling with freedom long enough, when a startling realization dawns. The weight you thought was crushing you was never meant to be lifted. It was meant to ground you. We imagine freedom as flight wings, tearing us from gravity, soaring into the limitless sky. But perhaps this is the great illusion. Freedom is not the escape from gravity, but the discovery that the very force pulling you down is what allows you to stand. Without the weight, you would drift into nothingness. Without the burden, you would dissolve into chaos. The ultimate truth is this: freedom is not light, it is meaningful weight. It is the gravity that anchors you to existence, that gives your choices substance, that turns fleeting moments into lived reality. To wish it away is to wish yourself away. This is why those who flee from freedom feel hollow, and those who embrace it even trembling discover a strange serenity. They stop expecting freedom to feel like relief and begin to see it as responsibility, transformed into significance. Imagine standing at a crossroads with endless paths. At first, the sight terrifies you, but then, instead of staring at the infinity of choices, you choose one path and step forward. That single act transforms the endless void into a journey. The other paths do not vanish. They remain possibilities, shadows, but they no longer paralyze you. By choosing, you have given weight to the moment. You have made reality bend toward your will. This is the secret Sartre hinted at when he said we are condemned to be free. Condemned, yes, but also empowered. For condemnation becomes liberation once you realize that freedom is not an affliction to endure, but a gift to shape. The final rebellion is not against authority or society, or even the fear of failure is against the illusion that freedom should ever be easy. The truth is, it was always meant to feel heavy. That heaviness is the proof that your life is yours, and no one else's. Consider how Renaissance painters depicted saints, martyrs, and visionaries. They did not paint them floating weightlessly in bliss. They painted them grounded, faces lifted to the heavens, but feet firmly rooted on earth, bearing the gravity of their calling. Freedom, in its highest form, looks the same. Not escape, but embodiment. Not weightlessness, but the grace of carrying weight with dignity. And here lies the deepest paradox. When you accept the heaviness, it no longer crushes you. By ceasing to resist, you learn to carry it. Responsibility becomes purpose. Consequence becomes significance. The abyss becomes a horizon. The few who can carry this weight are not superhuman. They are not free of fear, nor immune to failure. They simply recognize that the burden is the gift, that to live without it would be to float. They embrace freedom not because it is easy, but because it is the only condition in which true selfhood is possible. So what does this mean for you? It means the very struggles you thought disqualified you from freedom, the hesitation, the trembling, the dread of choice are proof that you are standing in its presence. The unease you feel when facing a decision, the nausea when confronting your reflection, the paralysis when staring into possibility, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are alive, conscious, and condemned to the most sacred task a human being can bear: to shape your existence from the raw clay of possibility. The ultimate truth is this: freedom will never feel light, but it will always be worth carrying. For in its heaviness lies your dignity, your meaning, your chance to carve your name into the fabric of reality. So ask yourself, in this moment, will you continue fleeing into cages disguised as comfort, or will you take the weight into your hands, press it against your chest, and let it ground you into who you were always meant to become? The choice is yours. It always has been, and it always will be.